final. So I feel like the requirements are fairly straightforward. If something's not finished, please finish it. And ideally you would incorporate the feedback from the crit into your pieces. So if you got feedback on like extra stuff to put in the scene, like textures to tweak, lighting tweaks, etc., at least consider, like ultimately it's your project. If you don't like something aesthetically, like it's up to you to not put that in. But it is good to, at least consider the things that, people are saying to you. You'll also need to share reference stuff with your team, or share your models with your teammates. I sent out like a little email this morning with like final times and stuff, and also just like other info about like how to do that. So one thing you can do is just share like a little FBX of your textures. If you go into the, let's see if I have it. If you go into your FBX export settings, there we go. Under the file specific options for include, go down, there's this little embed media tab. If you check this box on, it should pull in all of your texture files and all of that stuff with it. So you would just need to give them that one FBX file. They could put that in, and it should pull in, again, all of the textures files and stuff that it needs with that FBX file. It does tend to make a large file, and I have not tested this with Arnold materials before, but it will work really nicely with Lamberts, etc. This is usually how I would get stuff into Unity if it has textures on it, is just doing a little FBX export with embed media checked. Other thing is like literally just transferring them all of their files manually. Just make sure that when you hook up your files, you did it with the project set, so that when your teammate like sets their project, it's not, the files aren't some weird path like leading to your desktop or something like that. And then if you have your file, like if you've organized stuff under source images and like source images, and then a folder for like your table textures, whoever downloads the file from you would also need to put the textures in the same folder structure, so you would also need a folder for table with those textures in it. Otherwise, you would just have to rehook up everything manually. Not the end of the world, just kind of annoying. Any questions on that? Cool. All right, where am I going? Great. Apart from just sort of finishing everything, mostly what I'm looking for is renders for your final. So again, I don't really need the Maya files. I want sort of 3 groups of renders. So the first one is your turntable. Submit me whatever the most recent one you have is. So if you've done no modifications to your hero object or hero object textures since the last turntable, submit me the other turntable that you've already submitted. If you have modified your hero object or the textures for it, please re-render your turntable and also the turntable wireframe and resubmit those as well. Any questions on that? Cool. And then there's 2 other groups of renders that I want. So one of them is the renders of the entire environment. I more or less went over these, I think, last class when I sort of said, do these for your last assignment thing. But basically, you'll be doing at least 4 different camera angles, and you'll be rendering each camera angle from both your daylight lighting and your night lighting. And I would like them to be like the exact same camera angle, so what I would probably recommend doing is just going into Maya and just doing create, camera, position these wherever you want, and just have a single camera for each of your renders. You can just sort of go through systematically that way and ensure that you have the same render angles, and you're not sort of like winging it. And if you need to go back and re-render one, you have that camera there. You don't need to, again, like guesstimate where the angle was. So the 4 angles that I require, 1, have at least one render that shows off your hero object, the one that you made. Presumably this would be, you like your model enough to show it close up in a render. But it should, highlight some kind of interesting feature in terms of the model or the textures of your object. And brownie points or like bonus points if it also is like compositionally a nice image, rather than just sort of like a top-down image of your object like on a desk. And then one of your other renders should contain your furniture and your decorative objects. So this does not need to be in the same render. If like your furniture is on the other side of the room from your decorative, just do one render for each, that's totally fine. So between those, just showing off of your objects, that's going to be 2 to 3 renders. Again, 1 for your hero object and 1 to 2 for your decorative and furniture, depending on where they are in the space. For your remaining renders, or if you want to do extra renders, which is always welcome, just show off your room in any interesting way that you think makes sense, is an interesting angle, features like some cool like layout stuff you did. Just like do something kind of interesting. It would be nice, I would say, to get at least 1 render, and this could be an additional render if you wanted, or just like this extra 4th one, where you see like kind of an overview of the whole space. Again, preferably in like an interesting artsy way, but just so that the viewer has like an idea of sort of the position of like where they're sitting in as they're looking at the objects themselves, if that makes sense. Also something that like shows, if you have windows and doors, like kind of shows where they are, helps the viewer gain a better understanding of your space and where the lighting is from, and contextualize the other renders that they're looking at. So again, pretty much pick those at least 4 angles and render them both in day and night lighting. And that's the stuff from the environment. Are there any questions on that? Cool. This is also the only time for like any assignment that I actually care about naming conventions. So I've listed the naming conventions pretty much under every single little render thing, or like specific render. For this one, just like if you name it just room underscore day or night, depending on whichever lighting you're doing, underscore just the number of the render, and then whatever extension you're using. If you want to do TIFFs, I know I can open those on those computers without using Photoshop. Otherwise, I'm just going to find a random TIFF and just paste it into all of your folders like a crazy person. All right, and then for the other renders that I want, these are just showing off your objects themselves. So these are not in your scene. Basically, think of setting up a new scene in terms of doing like a turntable. You just don't need to render the whole turntable. But just set up a little scene for your object. Doesn't need to be anything crazy fancy. Set up nice lighting that shows off your object and render your scene in said space. You can earn more points for that by doing something a little bit more fancy. If you have a small object, maybe put it on like a halfway, like not completely horrible looking little wooden table or something like that. Put like an interesting background in that kind of makes sense with the object. Again, it doesn't need to be super fancy. I'm thinking just like table on some kind of like generic wallpaper would be fine for like half of these objects. But try to make it look nice. These are kind of the renders that you would be using theoretically to show off if you were going to like send these to someone for a portfolio kind of thing. These would be the ones that are really going to like show off your objects themselves. So do try to make them look decent. So I would like, for your hero object, I would like 2 renders of that. So one preferably would be more or less like your whole object, kind of showing off like what the overall feel of the thing, what it is. Your other one can be the object from another angle. It could be a close-up on a specific piece you like. And again, you're welcome to do more than 2 if you are so inclined. I can never stop at 2 because I'm a crazy person, but to each their own. And again, naming convention for these guys. And then for furniture and decorative object, I would like at least 1 render of each of them, again, in their own little scene that's like well lit and nice. If you want to reuse scenes, you're welcome to if it makes sense. You might need to tweak the lighting, like if you have a small hero object, like a giant furniture object, you might need to, again, fiddle with the lighting a little bit. But you're welcome to throw them in the same scene, like that's totally fine. And that's pretty much the object showcase renders. Any questions on those? All right. So that is pretty much all of the stuff that is due for your final. So for the actual submission, I would like a single zip file with whatever, again, your most recent turntable is, be it the one that you've already submitted for week 8 or an updated one. And then all of the renders mentioned above, named with appropriate naming conventions. And there should be at least 12 images. So you'll have 8 images that are just like the environment renders, 4 day, 4 night. And then the 4 renders at least of your individual objects. So again, minimum of 12 images plus a turntable is what I'm expecting for each of these folders. The other thing I would like you to do, and this doesn't need to be pretty by any stretch of the imagination, if you could just go through and pick like one of your renders or even like screenshot your Maya viewport with like an overview of your scene, just circle the objects in the scene that you did not make. I don't want to like, spend like 20 minutes giving you feedback on a thing that is not even yours and you had nothing to do with making it, because that is just kind of a waste of everybody's time. So again, just circle the stuff you didn't make. You can do it in Paint. I don't really care. Doesn't need to be fancy. And then also if you could give me a directory with all of your reference material, sorted and named accordingly. So I'll kind of just like leave that up to you what that makes sense is. If you had like 30 reference images for a particular object, probably put that in its own folder. If you just had like chair references and there's 2 of them, you can just name it like chair 1 and chair 2 and just leave everything in a big folder. I just want it to be easy to find what I'm looking for if I need to like compare your object to the reference. And for this, I mentioned this earlier, but I do not want or need your Maya directory or any of your textures or your Maya files. I do not want them. I do not need them. They make giant zip files. Please don't give them to me. If you have specific questions about any of your Maya files, etc., feel free to email me said files. Yep.
So you want the reference images, but you don't want any of our textures?
That is correct. Yeah, for this one, I'm very like, don't care how you made it, just want it to look decent. But yeah, so that's pretty much what I expect for this. Are there any questions about the turntable? Or what am I saying? Turntable requirements? Yep.
Does it matter what image file or image type file we use? It's you had mentioned text before. But
I don't particularly care. I like not JPEGs, just because JPEGs are icky. TIFFs I know will open well on these computers, but I'm not requiring TIFFs. Usually I'll do TIFFs, PNGs, or EXRs if you're feeling extremely aggressive for like keeping data. But yeah, so that would be pretty much just follow like the generic submission guideline stuff, which I linked here, which is usually, I think just says like JPEG or TIFF or EXR, or I'm sorry, dear God, not JPEGs. PNGs, TIFFs, or EXRs. Do not use JPEGs. But yeah, that's really my only thoughts with that. Any other questions on the submission? Cool. So your final is, again, Tuesday, 1, 2, 3, next week.